by the environment they grew up in. And you have a story that I was amazed to hear. And I really need to get this out. And folks, we're probably going to be here for a bunch of shows because this is not going to happen in 30 minutes. And I'm going to let Dick explain it, but what I need to ask the first question is what motivated you to get interested in the lengthy legality of the alcohol beverage advertising that you can relate it to young people?
Well, Mike, your point is well is well made about the old argument about nature and nurture, but they're not exclusionary. It's a little of both, and certainly how people are raised and what they see and hear is very important. But that goes collectively as a society too. It has to do with the code for movies and television and that type of thing. Well, I became interested because in my background, as you mentioned, I spent some time in the state police. And had seen a lot of damage done by alcohol, both in family fights and car accidents. I've had the unpleasant task of notifying parents that their kids weren't coming home, that type of thing. But as an adult in this society, we've all seen how often the presence of alcohol has caused trouble. Statistics are abhorrent for date rape in colleges. It's just it's a national issue. I became interested because although I wasn't a drinker at the time, I haven't drank in years, and I'm not a prohibitionist, and I'm not a moralist about it, so that wasn't the issue, but I was concerned about my kids seeing. And I passed through our living room one morning, and I think it should have been the NCAA basketball finals. But as I passed through the living room, my young children at that time, 6, 8, 10, that type of thing, were fixed on the television, so I paused to see what had captured their interest, and it was a beer commercial. And I watched for a moment, and I looked at them, and I walked into the kitchen, and I told my wife, I said, there's something wrong with that. And she said, what? And I just briefly said what I know about this product as an industry, the downsides of it, the properties of it, what can manifest, how it can manifest itself in your life, how it manifests itself in our society, and there's a great deal of negativity with it, measured against what young people were seeing from the first time they can watch television and comprehend a commercial. They were seeing none of this, and it piqued my curiosity. It wouldn't leave me, and I wouldn't leave it. So I started sort of on a journey, if you will, to find out how this comes about, that in this consumer-oriented society where ladder companies have been sued because they made a case the base wasn't wide enough considering how tall the ladder was. How is it that this industry puts out a product in front of young people as well as adults that has the inherent dangerous properties it does and is not required to mention a bit of it? So I began by inquiring of the Attorney General's office. This was a couple decades ago, actually. And I spoke to a man by the name of Fred Hoffaker, who at that time worked under Frank Kelly, and he was the Assistant for Consumer Affairs. And I spoke to him just as an initial conversation and told him my concerns. Excuse me. And he said he would look into it, and I didn't hear anything back. So we talked again, and I made a little stronger case and gave him the impression I was pretty serious about getting an answer for this. And he confided that he too was concerned about the ads, and he was a parent and that type of thing. So he apparently took it to his superiors. And what transpired a short time afterwards was my going to have a meeting with him and discussed it. And the decision was made from then Attorney General Frank Kelly's office that they weren't going to do anything. And Mr. Hoffaker's response, which I recall nearly verbatim, but this is it in essence, was he said, Mr. Overton, you understand, I'm just a small cog in this machine. Frank Kelly owns the machine, and if Frank Kelly says we're not doing anything, we're not doing anything. Well, I stewed over it for a while, but then I called the Detroit Free Press, and I told them my concerns, and there was a gentleman there who had done articles on this type of thing. He apparently then called the Attorney General's office, and in my travels home from Lansing, by the time I got home after this appointment, the phone rang, and it was an administrative assistant, a female, from the Attorney General's office. Well, apparently the Detroit Free Press had called their office already inquiring about this issue. And her introductory remarks to me on the phone were, Mr. Overton, I understand you're not happy with our position on this, that type of thing. Well, I heard some whispering in the background, and I can only guess, but when I realized who she was, I think Mr. Kelly and Mr. Hoffick were in the background trying to gather information about what I was going to do next. Well, I thought about it for a long time and still concerned with what I knew young people could encounter. It didn't seem logical to me that in an area where we restrain violent movies from 17-year-olds, where adult magazines are not readily accessible in a newsstand, why were these commercials so prevalent in front of impressionable young people? So I wound up, after a period of time and some other work, actually taking two of the largest brewers, Anheuser-Busch and Coors, to court, charging them with a violation of the Michigan Advertising Act regarding disclosure of material information, that type of thing. What I found in visiting with an attorney that I sought help from was that they were very interested in it. It was a gentleman here in Kalamazoo who I honestly can't remember his name. I stopped in his office and quickly asked if they were interested. But he said, you know, you have some good points there, and what you need to do is look at the statute and see what you can do. Well, I read the statute in detail, and it had a couple other provisions. It said if you made any consumer complaint to the Attorney General's office and they didn't respond within a certain period of time, you then could go to your county's prosecuting office and raise the same issue. And if in I think 30 days or so, they didn't respond, any citizen could file a complaint on the full authority of the prosecutor or the Attorney General using that statute. So I have a cousin that's an attorney, and he had people that had been involved in product liability before, so we prepared a complaint. And I put down my $25 in Paw Paw, Michigan, and I charged Anheuser-Busch and Coors with violation of the Michigan Advertising Act. And in fact, they had to respond. A short time later, both of them showed up in court. What I found very interesting, and the court case itself went on for some time, and there's quite a story about the research I did and the number of people I talked to. What I found in preparation for the court case was just how many experts in the advertising industry shared my position on this. At one point, in preparing for the case, I went to one of the local libraries, and at that time, maybe they still do, they would have phone books for the major cities. So I took out a New York phone book, and I went to the Yellow Pages, and I went to advertising agencies, and I just picked one that I thought must be a prominent, successful firm. They had a nice big ad. And I called the gentleman up and had a lengthy conversation with him about advertising in general, about advertising to young people, about when he inquired what this was all about. He was very nice, very gracious. We wound up talking for about an hour. I think he at first thought I was a college kid doing a paper. But we spent quite a bit of time on the phone, and when I told him what I was looking at and what I was thinking about doing and what I was preparing for, which was hopefully a court case where these issues would be examined before a court, when he found out it was the alcoholic beverage industry, he became very interested. And one of the remarks he made was he kind of laughed, and he says, boy, he says, you don't know how people in the advertising industry envy the alcoholic beverage industry. We all know, Mike, you've seen the car advertisements where it says it's a train driver on a closed course, or gosh, listen to a Shantex commercial. Right. Jokingly, we hear some of the warnings and say, gosh, if those are all the dangerous properties, I'm not even going to try this. But by law, in a consumer-oriented society, those are required to be brought forth whenever you bring the product to the marketplace. So I asked him what he meant by envying the industry, and he said, because they don't have to do any of this. He said, you're talking about a product that really has very little utility value, meaning it won't wash your clothes, it won't shine your car. And he jokingly said, not much utility value past generating revenue for the people that make it. So as I spoke at length, I had several issues I wanted to cover, one of which was advertising to young people. And I said, one of the things that are, of course, going to be hopefully an issue in this case, we get to discuss it openly, is its effect on young people. And do the alcoholic beverages industry target young people? And I said, what's your position on that? And he kind of laughed again, and he said, look, in the advertising pie, as he called it, it's cut up into several pieces. He said when their account, in fact, he mentioned that at one time they had Ford Motor Company's national account. He said if we are looking for appealing to an individual who is interested in prestige in his vehicle, we show the Lincoln in front of the country club. If we have someone who is interested in performance and the free lifestyle, we certainly show the Mustang going down the road with the top down and the guy shifting gears, and so on. He says, everybody that markets a national product certainly has segments of the population, and they want to cover as many as they can with what limited dollars and time they have for advertising. But he said there's one piece of the pie that's always there. It's called branding. And he explained to me that branding is done at the junior high level. He said that we knew when we were advertising automobiles, for instance, he said if we didn't have, and you can probably remember this from being a kid, if we didn't have freshmen fighting over Ford and Chevrolet, couldn't even drive yet, we were losing market share. So a part of that advertising pie, one piece that's always there, is that targeted group at the junior high level. So he says if you put those together, absolutely yes, part of their advertising program is at the junior high level. It's branding, it's impressions, it's almost non-conscious thought, but images, and we all know how glamorous, fun, and beautiful alcoholic beverage commercials are. There's never anything bad that happens, and there's no warning. So he said that absolutely, in fact, he made the remark that if that piece of their advertising pie isn't there, they'd better get a different advertising agency because they're losing market share. But we went on and had a lengthy talk about the psychology of advertising and specifically advertising of alcoholic beverages. And he said, you know, there are those in the industry who believe that alcoholic beverages are actually marketed to the problem drinker as well as young people in the branding and that type of thing. And he dissected a couple commercials that reinforced that. But I was going on and getting ready for what I presumed would be a lengthy and detailed discourse on advertising and did they violate the state statutes. And that was a great deal of my research going up to that point. But what initiated it was my concern for young people. As I said, we all know young people that have started a relationship with alcohol that maybe resulted in a tragedy, or maybe later on in life became a part of them or a habit that had impacted relationships, jobs, that type of thing. So I asked him just how powerful or how much of an impact he thought alcoholic advertising had on young people. And I always remember he said, well, let me ask you this. Do young people drink illegally or drive illegally? And I said, well, I would imagine they drink illegally. And he said, that's because car companies couldn't use the advertising liquor companies do. So it was a pretty interesting conversation.
Well, that reminds me, you know, we had a talk on the way up here
Right.
about advertising to the demographics that they want to market to.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I was younger, I think it was the 60s or 70s, I had heard somewhere, and I don't know where I heard it, but that Hollywood made movies for the 15, 16, and 17-year-old girls. And if you could get the girls interested in the movie,
Sure.
they would either make their father and mother take them, or their brothers and sisters take them, or their boyfriend take them, and they would double their viewing population,
Sure.
by advertising to the one section, and it's even one sex, not even boys.
Sure.
That's huge. And people don't realize that.
Right.
And in our counseling practice, when we get an 18-year-old, they come in, they say, I've got to do a substance abuse evaluation, and I've got to do substance abuse classes. You know, at 18, and he's already been busted.
Yeah.
Now, if he's not careful, and we get third offenses by the time they're 20, sometimes we get them back 2 and 3 times. They put a value on that, which they've grown up with,
Mm-hmm.
like your children saw in the movies, the commercials. The value system they place on drinking, and we get mostly guys. We get girls every now and then, but mostly guys, who feel that's a male
Rite of passage.
rite of passage.
Yep.
I'm going to get with the boys. We're
Right.
going to go back to behind the barn. Well,
Right.
we live in a rural area.
Right.
Or go on the street corner somewhere, and we're going to go into an alley, and we're going to drink.
Right.
And it makes us feel grown up.
And we're taught that even when we have trouble with it. In other words, I use the analogy, if you ate at a certain restaurant or for the first time consumed, let's say, spaghetti sauce that was spicy, and you had difficulty with it, you wouldn't do it again. But you haven't been harangued and pounded with decades of glamorous advertising that would have made this a rite of passage, that would have made you believe you're going to be more attractive, more sociable, funnier, that type of thing. And yet we do that with the alcoholic beverage industry. The advertising, what I was alleging was that when you get into the legal definitions for what is legal advertising, one of the serious points is that misrepresentation, false statements, carry the same weight as omission of material fact. So if you have left out material facts, things that can go wrong, inherent dangers in your product, you're liable for that. And what I learned is that my lawsuit would have sort of built a bridge between how this industry represented its product and any damage that may follow. In other words, if I didn't tell people about the hazards of Shentex, I use it as an example because if you listen to may cause drowsiness, change in temperature, call your doctor, that type of thing. And I marvel at this and say, gosh, after all those warnings, but they're required by law. So omission of a material fact isn't where if you spill Pepsi on your white Levi's, the caramel coloring may stain them. That's one of life's little hazards. But the law and tons of precedent cases say if 1 in a million people can be killed or seriously harmed or dismembered or something material happened in their existence, the responsibility goes back on the manufacturer or provider of the product or service based on their superior knowledge of their product. They know more about than anybody else. If you remember the lawsuits on cigarettes, part of what came out was that alleging that they were tweaking the nicotine content and that type of thing. Well, in the actual complaint that I filed, I stated that the alcoholic beverage industry knows that consuming alcoholic beverages can impede your motor skills. They know that it can be addictive. They know it has behavior deviant properties. They know it can be fatal if overconsumed in a single setting. They know all of this. And under Michigan advertising law, they should be compelled to bring it forth. But it goes back to what the gentleman from the New York Advertising Agency told me, sort of tongue-in-cheek. We admire that in it. We love that in it. We wish we could operate the way they do. We have no idea why they're allowed to operate the way they do, but they do. So I engaged in maybe some things we can talk about later. I then started on a road where I researched advertising, law, product liability, everything you can think of in preparation for this court case. It ultimately went before Judge Buell in Papaw, Michigan. The first thing that happened in the court case was that Anheuser-Busch showed up with 2 or 3 attorneys, who, by the way, prior to the court hearing, were all in the judge's chamber shaking hands and being introduced. I had a second lawsuit with Coors, and one of the tenets of law is that you have to be specific. You just can't say all the commercials are bad. So the premise in the Anheuser-Busch case was in one of their commercials, they showed someone coming down a slide doing a flip. It was some island setting where everybody's having a good time. And my premise was that that was misrepresentation of a material fact. It certainly shouldn't be done by most people who aren't trained in it, but my gosh, done by the people who are drinking. It's the old joke, what do you hear? What's the last thing you hear from a drunken redneck before they get hurt? Hey, y'all, watch this. And the Coors, currently at that time, were running a campaign saying there's no slowing down with the silver bullet. And that was everywhere. So those were the 2 cases. And when I showed up in court for the preliminary hearing, Coors showed up with a couple of attorneys. They were very interested in the outcome of this. Well, the first thing that happened was that Anheuser-Busch filed a motion to have the case dismissed, claiming the court had no jurisdiction, that only the Liquor Control Commission had jurisdiction over their advertising. Well, I'd done my homework. I prepared for about 15 months before we actually came to court. And I stood up in court and I asked Judge Buell, a little leeway, Your Honor, I'm a layman, and he said, certainly. I said, either the counsel doesn't know the law in Michigan, or this is a deliberate attempt to mislead the court. And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, that was true in 1933 when prohibition was lifted. And jurisdiction for almost all marketing, including matchbooks and rulers, was vested with the Liquor Control Commission. Ironically, in the 50s, that authority was struck down in a court case brought by the alcoholic beverage industry, claiming it infringed on their corporate right of free speech. Well, there was a little recess, and the lawyer's assistants ran out to the law library, came back and whispered, he's right. So we went on, and the court case was ultimately dismissed by Judge Buell, who I remember remarkably, his statement was, he learned a long time ago that anyone who attempted to legislate social policy from the bench was either brave or foolish, and he was neither. But it was never examined on the merits of the case. And I was prepared in great detail to talk about things like duty to warn, assumption of risk, all those things that make up lawful advertising or put an individual in a position to be liable for his misrepresentation. And one of the lawyers in a recess, who's passed away since, ironically, came across the aisle to me when they were out researching something. And he said, you understand what you're doing is attempting to build the bridge between how our product is represented and us being liable for any harm that follows. He said, I'm here to see that that bridge is never built. And I thought, again, what a unique position. Most manufacturers of a product or a service, when they find out their consuming public is at risk of being harmed, they're immediately worried about image. Most of them jump to participate in the cure. You may remember when Ford had a problem alleged that their cars were dropping into reverse by accident. It was somewhere back in the mid-70s or something. Well, they brought in every model that might have that transmission in and fixed it. They sent out stickers to everybody. I had one on my steering wheel that warned against that. But here I thought, how unique. Here's a company, Anheuser-Busch, who advertises to young people, powerful marketing, is allowed to omit material facts, and yet has a slogan that says, proud to be your bud. It's all fraternal. We're all friends here. And yet admits in court that they're there to see that there is no fiduciary relationship between them and their customers. In fact, society as a whole has swallowed this idea that if you get in trouble with this particular product, it's your own darn fault. Again, a precedent we don't have with anybody else. That's falling on the assumption of risk doctrine. The problem with that is the assumption of risk doctrine only prevails if the provider of the service or the manufacturer of the product has in fact brought all the information, good and bad, to the consuming public and potential customers so they can make an informed decision. This industry has no such history, no such practice. So it's a unique position. It's a very powerful position. You know, probably in your profession, in your work, how much or how prevalent alcohol and other substances are in social difficulties, personal relationships, that type of thing. I think it's tragic that we put little dogs and cute people and funny things and 10th grade humor in front of our young people to bring a product to the marketplace that has a tremendously negative history. The Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco and Firearms years ago was charged with a study, and I had a copy of it. I think it was from 1988. And I had read it in detail, again, preparing for the court case that I'd hoped would go to trial. And they were charged with looking at the drinking habits of America and the cost of it. And the long and the short of it was two things. There's a great deal of detail, which individual companies that cited, Ford Motor Company cited the loss from work productivity and bad work in the factories, that when it got to the dealership, they had to pay dealer rates for getting things repaired, that type of thing. But they came up with two things that were very powerful. One is that it is a tremendous cost in this country, just to problem drinkers or regular drinkers. They estimated that, and I can testify as a police officer, that probably about 60% of the police officers in this country could be laid off if we didn't have a drinking problem. And not just a drug problem, but just a drinking problem. I mean, watch a few episodes of Cops on television and you'll see. The second thing, which just stunned me, was collectively after this assessment and analysis, they said that probably the alcoholic beverage industry was the most subsidized industry in the United States, ahead of agriculture and defense, meaning that they kept all the profit and the public as a whole picked up all the costs. And we do. We pick it up in law enforcement. We pick it up in social services provided for rehabilitation. We pick it up in law enforcement. We pick it up in car accidents and deaths. So this piece of advertising, well, it's not a cure. It's certainly a piece everybody has to respect and do lawfully. But this advertising piece and bringing their product to the marketplace is really in violation of almost everybody else out there. When I got done with the court case, I see we have a couple of minutes left. When that particular court case was finished, I walked out into the hallway, and immediately after, I had some footsteps quickly coming at me, and I turned around to see who it was. And it was Judge Buell. And he had taken off his cape, and he was in a white shirt and slacks. And he walked up to me, and he said, Mr. Overton, I want to tell you, in my decades on the bench, I forget the years, that's the finest, what they call pro per, improper person, finest pro per representation I've seen. He said, but you have to understand people have to be responsible for their own actions. And I said, Your Honor, I agree, as do corporations. And he said, well, I think people understand and know fully the hazards of alcohol. And I said, well, that'd be an interesting thing to the medical community, because you're taking judicial notice that the one piece of information everybody leaves the womb with is about alcoholic beverages. And he said, well, people have to be responsible for their actions, and I disagree with you. And I said, well, if people really do have good, usable, accurate, workable information about this product on balance, then we have a lot of very self-destructive people in this country, because they're dropping like flies. They're becoming addicted. They're losing relationships and jobs. I said, there's a ton of very self-destructive people out here. And he looked away and he said, you know, I never thought about it like that. And I said, well, it's a little late now, isn't it? And we parted company. He has since ironically sent me a couple letters and some articles on this topic that sort of made me believe maybe he's changed his position. But the advertising itself and how it's done is a whole other story. The genetics, the physiology that people know, very, very powerful. And again, as the advertising exec from New York said, gosh, we envy those people. We couldn't do that. So.
Well, we're just about to close this show, and I can't wait for the next one, because I've got some stuff I want to put in here. I want to thank you very much, Dick, for spending your time and coming on the show to put this out, because what you're talking about is stuff that we deal with in our system, in our counseling every day. Yep. With the young people, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dick, and look forward to the next show.
Well, thanks for having the opportunity here.